Good morning, Math 8. As you can see today, we are going to talk about solving one-step equations. We are going to look at this flow chart first. I want you to write down on a piece of paper what you notice, what you wonder. Go ahead and pause the video now and write down your notices and wonders about this flow chart. You might notice that this one says PEMDAS. And you might have heard that before, and this one says GEMDAS, and maybe you've heard that one, and this one says GEMS. We're going to start using this one in class because the M and the D and the A and the S are actually going to be on the same line. So when you see here and here, you're going to actually see M and D, S and A, right? Multiplication and division, subtraction and addition. So go ahead and keep that in mind as we move forward with class. The next thing we're going to talk about, and I want you to do, is on a piece of paper, that same paper, you are going to write down everything that you know already about equations. I want to know what must an equation have, what symbols might you see, what numbers might you see, is there anything else that you might see? Go ahead and pause the video now and write that down. Okay, when we're working with equations, we're always going to recall our 3 commandments for solving equations. You'll notice over here, there is a word bank. I want you to look in this word bank. There are 6 words or numbers, and there are 6 blanks in these 3 sentences. I want you to try and use your powers of deduction and fill those in. Go ahead and pause the video now and write this down. So this first one says, what you do to one side, you blank do to the other. To the blank, sorry. Giving you the answers now. So, what you do to one side, you must, absolutely always must, do to the other side. All right? That's something super important to remember. The next one, number 2, says you can make any number blank by adding or blank. Well, we know we're talking about adding, so we're probably talking about subtracting also. So I'm going to tell you right now, when we're talking about equations, when we're adding and subtracting, we're always trying to eliminate, which means make a number 0. So we can make any number 0 by adding or subtracting. All right, the last one, number 3, says you can make any number blank by blank or dividing. Well, we only have 2 left. We're talking about dividing, so it's pretty certain we're going to be talking about multiplying. And when we're talking about multiplying or dividing, we're always in an equation going to be talking about making a number 1. So you can make any number 1 by multiplying or dividing. Go ahead and pause the video and make sure you have these written down somewhere where you will be able to remember them. The next thing we're going to talk about is our inverse operations. When we're looking at these inverse operations, our goal is to find one word that fills in both the blanks on this line. So what one word undoes addition, and addition undoes that word? So I want you to look at all 3 of these lines. Try and find a word for each of these lines that does this. Go ahead and pause your video here and think about that. Hopefully you've written down some answers. So we're talking about addition, like we talked about above. We know that when we're talking about addition, we're usually talking about subtraction. And when we're talking about subtraction, we're usually talking about addition. So subtraction undoes addition, which means addition undoes subtraction. So we know that when we add something, if we have a number and we add that same amount to it, we can make a 0. If we have -5 and we add 5 to it, we get 0. If we have 5 and we subtract 5 from it, we have 0. Now we're looking at multiplication. Remember, we only use our dot and our parentheses now. We don't use the X anymore. When we're talking about multiplication, what undoes multiplication? What is our inverse operation of multiplication? The ones that we talk about are division, and the symbols that we use are what? We have our division symbol with the dots. We have our long division symbol. Notice this is like curly. It's not squared or has any kind of angle. It's circular. All right. What's the last one that we could use? The last one we can use is a fraction. A fraction is another way of writing division. Okay. So division undoes multiplication and multiplication undoes division. All right. Here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. We've just recently started talking about exponents. So what else did we just start talking about? What is the inverse of an exponent? A square root, a cube root, or in this case, we're just going to say a root. Because there are other outside of square and cube. There are other ones. We are only going to use square and cube. Okay? So now what I want you to do is I want you to look at this problem and I want you to try and get this variable all by itself, right? We've got this x right here. Try and get this x all by itself. The goal is to have just x and then on the other side the solution. So I want you to try and write your math on this side. And then what steps did you take on this side? And then tell me the inverse operation you took and why. Go ahead and pause your video here and go ahead and try that for me, okay? All right, here is what we're calling another way. This is the same problem that you just worked on, and we're going to do it again. So my first step, and what I recommend you always do as your first step, is to rewrite the equation so that you can actually do some work with it. You need to know what you need to do. So my first step is always rewrite. The equation. Okay? So I know that I'm not going to do anything with this number. This number is going to stay all by itself. I'm not going to touch it. It's a variable. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. Step number 2 is to look at the next variable or the next number. Well, what's attached to my x here? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it attached with multiplication or division? When I look at this, I can see that it's attached with subtraction. So this subtraction right here tells me that I need to add. I'm going to use my inverse operations. So I'm going to add 7/2. But what was our first commandment? What you do to one side, you must do to the other side. So I'm also going to do that on this side. Then I'm going to draw my equal line. So what did I do? I add 7/2 to both sides. Okay? Then I'm going to bring this x down because I'm not going to do anything with it. X. What did we say we were doing when we had negative 7/2 plus 7/2? We're eliminating it. We're going to move it from one side to the other. So we're eliminating it on this side where the x is. So you can either put a 0 here, if you want to put a 0 here, to remind yourself that you're adding or subtracting 0 here, and then there's an equal sign. Or what most of us typically do in math is leave a blank. So x equals, now I need to know what 14 1/2 plus 7/2 is. Well, they're both positive, so I'm just adding. I'm going to come over here and do some math work.